Today, we are going to talk about the background for adopting the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, that is ICESCR. The International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, that is ICESCR, was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1966 and it came into force from 3rd January 1976. It commits its parties to work toward the granting of economic, social and cultural rights, that is ESCR, to individuals, including labor rights and the rights to health, the right to education and the right to adequate standard of living. As on October 2012, the Covenant had 160 parties. A further 7 countries, including the United States of America, had signed but not yet ratified the Covenant. The ICESCR is part of the International Bill of Human Rights along with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is UDHR, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that is ICCPR, including the latter's first and second optional protocols. The Covenant is ministered by the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Now let us first discuss about the jurisprudence of economic, social and cultural rights. None of the formulations adopted, however, deals with matters in the same detail as do International Labour Organization, that is ILO, instruments in the area. In this respect, one might consider that it is rather in relation to social and cultural rights where existing standards are less well developed that the Covenant has greatest utility. The recognition given to the right to food, housing, health and cultural life, for example, do not find comparable enactment elsewhere. While the Covenant benefits from an impressive scope, it does suffer from the fact that its terms are phrased in an excessively general manner. For example, whereas the European Social Charter has 3 articles dealing with the right to social security, the Covenant merely has the briefest of statements. Similarly, the right to food and housing, which are clearly complex and ill-defined concepts, are given little if any further substance in the text of the Covenant. The amount of detail to be included in the provisions of the Covenant was the subject of much debate in the drafting of the Covenant, although it was noted that more general wording could leave the way open to divergent and conflicting interpretations. Generally phrased provisions were often preferred in order to avoid restricting the scope of the articles and to prevent conflict with the standards established by the specialized agencies, particularly the ILO. The generality and breadth of the Covenant's terms could be said to contribute to its longevity by providing scope for a dynamic interpretation of its provisions. It does, however, place a heavy burden on the supervisory body, whose central role inevitably becomes one for developing and defining the content of the norms. One particular failing of the Covenant, especially when compared with the European Social Charter, is that it does not identify those groups that might be considered to need special protection. One particular failing of the Covenant, especially when compared with the European Social Charter, is that it does not identify those groups that might be considered to need special protection. Specific mention is made only to the position of women and children, that is Articles 3 and 10. Ideally, one might have hoped that mention would be made of the position of aliens, migrant workers, the elderly, and those with physical or mental disabilities. It would be wrong, however, to suppose that the Covenant fails to offer any protection in that respect. The rights to which the Covenant refers are the rights of everyone. The only limit ratio persona is to be found in Article 2, Clause 3, which permits developing countries to determine the extent to which they would guarantee economic rights to non-nationals. Equally, Article 2, Clause 2 prohibits discrimination of any kind as to race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth or other status. The term other status, as far as the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, that is Icescr, is concerned, includes advanced age and disability. It is also arguable that it may be interpreted to prevent discrimination on other grounds such as nationality, age, health status or sexual orientation. Now, let us discuss about the United Nations and the economic, social and cultural rights. The Icescr has its roots in the same process that led to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. A declaration on the essential rights of man had been proposed at the 1945 San Francisco Conference, which led to the founding of the United Nations, and the Economic and Social Council was given the task of drafting it. Early in the process, the document was split into a declaration setting forth general principles of human rights and a convention or covenant containing binding commitments. The former evolved into the UDHR and was adopted on 10th December 1948. Drafting continued on the convention, but there remained significant difference between UN members on the relative importance of negative civil and political versus positive economic, social and cultural rights. Those in favor of including economic and social rights in a separate covenant based their contention that civil and political rights were immediately enforceable or of an absolute character, while economic, social and cultural rights were to be progressively implemented. This eventually caused the convention to be split into two separate covenants, one to contain civil and political rights and the other to contain economic, social and cultural rights. The two covenants were to contain as many similar provisions as possible and be open for signature simultaneously. Each would also contain an article on the right of all people to self-determination. The first document became the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the second, the International Covenant on Economic, social and cultural rights. The drafts were presented to the UN General Assembly for discussion in 1954 and adopted in 1966. After all the discussions we had, we can conclude that the UN's three-pronged approach to the global protection and promotion of human rights includes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Together, they bind states through the force of their great moral authority, ratification or accession processes, and customary international law to certain standards and duties. The inclusion of Icescr, it was believed, would therefore produce an instrument that could not essentially be put into effect. The Eastern Bloc delegations argued for the preservation of the balanced conception of the human as is expounded in the UDHR and stressed the indivisibility of Icescr and civil and political rights. After much debate within the Commission and the various subgroups involved with the drafting of the covenants, the General Assembly's Third Committee recommended that the CHR draft two separate covenants which would be submitted and opened for signature at the same time. The ICCPR and the ICESCR had their birth on 16th December 1966 and entered into force on 26th March 1976 and the 3rd January 1976 respectively. And this covenant, that is ICESCR, is the only universal human rights instrument which deals extensively with the whole range of economic, social and cultural rights. And it is primarily by reference to the covenant that this category of rights is to be understood. Thank you.